Last week I put Peter Hitchens in the chair of Parliament, so I've promised to be on best behaviour this week, so I've got no one of any controversy whatsoever to address you. The message I want to send out from the Bow Group is that President Trump is most welcome in the United Kingdom, and so are all Americans. I have respect for the American ambassador, Billy Johnson, but I would disagree with the embassy's statements that as Americans you should keep a low profile in the United Kingdom while your president is visiting. I can't say I've ever experienced Americans keeping a low profile. It's not your natural state, and all power to you. Please feel most welcome here. You are welcome here, and the special relationship is one of the most important things to this country, and one of the most important things to the people of this country. There will be protesters tomorrow. They will represent a tiny minority of the British population. The vast majority of the British people who support the special relationship, who support the President of the United States coming to Britain, will be at work, will be at home, and the press won't give them any coverage. So what we're doing today is we're announcing that the President is welcome here, all the way from Parliament to the newly named Trump Arms of Parliament. We're delighted to be joined this afternoon by Daniel Kawczynski, MP, Nigel Farage, MEP, Chair of the EFDD Group, Patrick Sullivan, Director of the Trump is Welcome Committee, and Erica Miller from Republicans Overseas. I'm going to begin by handing over to our host this afternoon, Daniel, for some opening remarks. Then we're going to hear from Nigel Farage. I'm sure you've got nothing to say. No. But Daniel.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And welcome everybody here to the House of Commons. You can hear us at the back, I presume, can you? Just about? This room is normally where we meet on the Wednesday evening, the 1922 committee, where all the Conservative MPs meet with the chairman of the 1922 committee. So welcome to all of you who haven't been here before. We are going to, during this event, just quietly celebrate the visit of President Trump to our country. There are many people, Sadiq Khan is one of them, but there are many others who wish to denigrate and the visit of the President of the United States. But some of us understand the importance of America as our key strategic partner. And as we pull out of the European Union, this relationship will be even more important, both from a defense but also a trading prospect. Our bilateral trade with the United States is over £100 billion per annum, and we will be working very hard to ensure that there is a free trade deal with them as soon as possible. I'm very much looking forward to hearing what Nigel Farage has to say, because of course he is one of the very few politicians in our country who actually saw President Trump's candidacy as being feasible at a very early stage. And he has obviously managed in a relatively short period of time to create a certain amount of trust and understanding between him and the President of the United States. But what I would like to say is this: it's a message I take to American students who are studying here. My most special moment vis-a-vis the Americans was watching the D-Day celebrations, the 40th anniversary of the D-Day celebrations in 1984, when President Ronald Reagan stood on the top of the cliffs where the American Rangers had climbed up to liberate Europe. And many young people from America here are quite surprised when we talk about that, given the huge amount of denigration and criticism that Americans come in for. And let's not forget the extraordinary sacrifices and the blood that the Americans have spilled on so many occasions to liberate this continent. They are dependable allies of ours, people that we can trust and are genuine friends. And President Trump has been democratically elected by the American people, and we should be affording him every courtesy and respect during this visit. So this is an occasion for those of us in this country who understand the importance of America, understand the importance of respecting the wishes of the American people, making our views heard. Thank you very much for coming, and I pass on.
Well, it's my great pleasure to welcome Nigel Farage to the vote group.
Well, thank you to the vote group and to Daniel. And it's great to be here this morning. A positive meeting about the President's visit to this country. What about that? You know?
Yeah.
There is one slightly sad note this morning, and that is that somebody who has done so much to promote Anglo-American relations, namely Sir Christopher Mayer, who served many years in Washington, and is somebody who very regularly on the media writes, talks, speaks, and says a very simple message. Whatever you think of President Trump, whether you think he's a little bit brash, a little bit out there, whether you agree with his policies or not, the point is that actually this relationship between Britain and America matters, and that's why his visit matters enormously. Sadly, at 2:45 yesterday afternoon, he was assaulted on Victoria Station, quite badly hurt, hospitalised. The pictures are horrendous. The police have said that they suspect the motive is a robbery, but nothing was stolen. So we'll find out in time. We will find out in time what the true motives were. But it does perhaps highlight something that has gone horrendously wrong. Brexit was the first big global shock, followed, of course, by the election of Trump, and now we have a new Italian government. And it would seem that some of those who categorise themselves, place themselves on the liberal left, simply cannot accept these democratic results, are doing everything they can to denigrate them, to overturn them, but worse still, through our schools, colleges and universities, are frankly teaching a doctrine of hate. They are basically saying there is one worldview, which is a good view, and the correct view, and the other worldview is evil. And I think it's very important, however passionate we are about our politics, gosh, I'm passionate about my politics, but it is very important, if we're going to live in a proper free democratic society, to understand that we actually need to respect the individuals and the people with a different point of view. Daniel talked quite rightly about the Conde Hoffman, an amazing picture of Ronald Reagan. The whole point of what Britain and America did twice in the 20th century to save the free world was so that we could have open, free, democratic debate. So very, very important that we, on our side of this debate, do not stoop to their levels. We have to rise above that. We have to be better than that. I first really got involved with America in 1982. I worked for a firm called Drexel, Burnham Lambert, about which a film called Wall Street was made. And I spent nearly all of my career, when I had a proper job before politics, working for American companies. So I developed a very strong affinity with America. I've always loved the positivity. I've always loved the can-do attitude. But I think things went wrong in America in a similar way to here. The centralisation of power in the hands of bureaucracies, the inability of the electorate to feel that anybody was actually out there representing them, prepared perhaps to say things, to shake things up. So when President Trump hove into view, I thought, this is interesting. This is really interesting. Little did I think that I'd find myself on a stage in Jackson, Mississippi, with 20,000 Mississippians cheering on the presidential candidate, and there I was speaking on the stage, and I think I'm the only Brit that's ever spoken publicly in any American election campaign, and I was privileged and honoured to do it. The trouble was that however unpopular Brexit had made me with the UK mainstream media, backing Trump kind of trebled that, shall we say. But I've been absolutely resolute in my support for this man all the way through. I think he has good instincts. He understands the importance of nation state. He understands the connection between voters and those that represent them. And I'm beginning to see, despite, wall-to-wall negativity from our media virtually every single day, I am beginning to see a slight change of tone in this country. Even a Times editorial, not so long ago, said, whatever you think of the president, he is actually putting into practice what he promised the American electorate he would do. And bravo for that, is all I can say. He's restoring faith in the democratic process. Now, I was very excited about Trump becoming president, particularly after the fellow that had been there before. When Obama came here during the referendum to tell us that we'd be at the back of the queue, we knew there was something wrong with it, because an American would have said line, of course. They wouldn't have used the word queue. But it was pretty horrible, really, you know, for 8 years to have an American president who basically didn't like and didn't respect the British. And I felt the Atlantic got a whole lot wider during that 8-year period. When Obama flew to Europe, he didn't fly to London, he flew to Berlin. And he saw Germany as being the power, the place where he had to spend his time, because he could see that as we headed towards, you know, a unified political project in Europe, Germany would be the powerhouse. This is different with Donald Trump, and it should be a great opportunity. But I'm sorry to say, firstly, we've waited far too long to invite him. You know, Macron, I mean, somebody with diametrically opposed views. Macron made him guest of honour at Bastille Day. And again, the two may not have the same point of view, but they've built a relationship. We've been very hands-off about this invitation. And frankly, if one's really honest about it, this Prime Minister has, at every conceivable opportunity, followed the politically correct path in criticising Trump and his actions. So the special relationship is, I'm sorry to say, not in a very good place right here and now. And I would love to say that I think this is going to be a hugely successful visit, but I think it's going to be very difficult. You know, Trump at NATO yesterday and again this morning has simply reiterated the things that Obama had said, to be fair. That, you know, 29 members of a club, only 5 paying their way. It's time people did start to obey the rules. This was a golden opportunity for the British Prime Minister to step in the middle of this and to be a bridge, a broker between America and the rest of Europe, and she declined to take it. But I suspect where the real clash potentially will come, and whether it happens in private or whether it happens in public remains to be seen. But, you know, with Donald Trump, there's no difference really, is there? Because he says what he thinks anyway when he's on the public stage. He believes in Brexit. You know, I've discussed it with him many times. The people around him, like John Bolton, believe in Brexit. They think it's a great thing that we've done. And sure, you know, as Trump has said many times, he wants a Europe of nation states that he can respect and work with and cooperate with. And I think what happened at Chequers last Friday, which increasingly has been seen by Middle England as something of a betrayal of what people voted for, and words even stronger than that being used about the British Prime Minister. Well, in the last half an hour, the President has tweeted that he's not sure whether the voters in Great Britain are actually getting what they voted for. So it's going to be a very tense and a very difficult time. And I think it's very disappointing that what our current Prime Minister wants to do is to put us on a course of regulatory alignment that would actually make a trade deal with America an impossible thing to do. So I would just say this to my American friends, is I'm sorry, but you're going to have to be a little bit more patient with us. We're not quite ready yet to step up to the plate and to fully embrace the relationship that we need to in terms of security, the military, trade and investment. But it is only a matter of time, because the forces that were there behind Brexit that caused that earthquake, those forces are still there. We just need one or two, shall we say, minor adjustments within this place in terms of who is leading us. So longer term, I'm very bullish about the prospects and the relationship between our two nations. It's a tricky, slightly rocky time we're going through at the moment. And President Trump, you are very, very welcome in my country. Thank you.
I know you've got to be away, but I want to strongly disagree with you. You said Trump balloon is the greatest insult to a sitting president. I would say that Trump offering us an extremely favourable trade deal, free trade, zero tariffs with the United Kingdom, and Theresa May turning around and saying, no, thank you very much, is a bigger insult.
Yes. Yes.
How can you explain how the UK government has become so detached from our national interests?
Okay, well, firstly, the blimp. Look, and let's name him, shall we? Sadiq Khan. Sadiq Khan is pursuing this vendetta against this president and the Republican administration, and he's quite prepared to put his own personal preference, or should we say prejudice, above what is clearly in the national interest and very much in the interest of London as well. I cannot imagine that any other capital city in the West would have allowed this blimp to fly, outside their parliament on the visit of a United States president, any United States president. So I think it really is very childish, very silly. Can you imagine if an application had gone in to the Greater London Authority when Obama came to fly an Obama blimp? I mean, it wouldn't have happened, would it? It simply wouldn't have happened. So I'm really very angry with Sadiq Khan with GLA for doing that, because it's really very puerile behaviour. On the trade deal, look, what's gone wrong is this. Shortly after the Trump election, I was asked which event was the most significant. I won't tell you who asked me, but I was asked which event was the most significant. Was Brexit the most significant, or was the election of Trump the most significant? I said, well, constitutionally, Brexit was the most significant. But in reality, Trump's election is more significant, because our problem was that whilst we had this revolt of the people, the very next day, the power went back into the hands of those who effectively had tried to stop that change from happening. So I think the real answer, Ben, is I do not believe that inside this magnificent building and inside the environs of the media here in Westminster, I think they just still don't get it. They don't understand the motivation and the reasons that people voted for Brexit. They grossly underestimate just how reviled that Chequers agreement is by Conservative voters in the Shires, and it won't be long before the Labour voters in Barnsley and Burnley are saying much the same thing about their own Labour Party. So I think the real answer, Ben, is British elected politics has not yet caught up with where the country is, but it will at some point in time. And I would say about domestic politics, my own view, I wouldn't want to embarrass Daniel obviously, but my own view would be that if Mrs May stays as Prime Minister, she'll pretty much destroy the Conservative Party.
Thank you. Daniel, do you have any thoughts on Mrs May, the Conservative Party, its destruction?
Oh no, I'm here to talk about it.
You see, they're diplomatic to the last.
No, this is a meeting about our relations with America and President Trump.
No, it is, absolutely. But the one thing, Daniel, steering it back on Trump, is there is already incomprehension. I met Wilbur Ross a couple of months ago. He just couldn't comprehend. Well, why aren't you out? Why isn't the deal done? Why are we not talking? And I think that is the way the whole administration feels. They just can't understand what the problem is. And that is where the point of conflict potentially exists with this trip.
What I can't quite get my head around, especially now with Boris and Davis having passed from cabinet, is who exactly is going to engage with the Trump administration. Do you see any figures in or around the cabinet who Trump would take seriously?
Do you know, I mean, I've had good relations with quite a few of that team around Trump, and it's been going on for some time, because there was a wing of the Republican Party that understood what the Brexit cause was. So we've known, we've had these good relations for many, many years. And I mean, maybe the Trump tweet, which said that a lot of people are saying Nigel Farage should be the ambassador in Washington. I mean, I do kind of accept that I may not be full ambassadorial material. Would have been a hell of a good wine cellar, but I did say a few times to the government, I said, look, we've got a problem here. We do not have, because virtually every single cabinet minister had slagged off Trump during the campaign, including Boris Johnson, They'd also egged off Trump, and I said, we've got a problem here. We've got a British ambassador who frankly is not going to be able to have a conversation with these people because he's a globalist, absolutely sold up one. And I said from early on, if I could act in any way to help as an intermediary between the two, I'd be more than willing to do so. I didn't want paying for it. I didn't want an official position. I just would like to be able to try to help. And if you were going after business from a big potential client, and you met somebody who knew that customer and all of its directors well, the first thing you do is employ them. That's how the world works. At least if it works in the real world, is how it works. And they've just, time and again, not then wanted to use me in any constructive, positive way. I find it all a bit disappointing, and I find actually British politics at the moment really, really dismal, stuck in its tribal negativity. You've had your earthquake with Trump, you've got him, he's in, he's running again in 2020. I suspect he'll get a much bigger majority in 2020 than he got last time, but we've got a bit more work to do.
I'll just comment, whilst Nigel is still in the room, on the Brexit issue. I'm the first ever Polish-born British Member of Parliament, so I was born in Warsaw, and I recently went back to Warsaw last week to meet with the Eurosceptic caucus in the Polish Parliament. Very small, very few members of Parliament, but it's already started, and that caucus will grow as the EU interference in their domestic affairs increases, because the Poles are now starting to see a massive interference in their domestic affairs. Their economy is growing at 4.3% per annum, and we envisage that they will move from being a net recipient of EU funds to a net donor within the next 5 to 6 years. And really, there are millions, hundreds of millions of people on the continent of Europe who, like many of us, believe in sovereignty, believe in sovereign nation states. And what better man to exude this than Nigel, but to believe in your country being a sovereign nation state and cooperating with other European countries through NATO and the Common Defence Platform, trading with them, but from a position of sovereignty. And sometimes I say to my constituents in Shrewsbury that Brexit feels like walking through a minefield. But we are leaving a path with breadcrumbs for others to follow. And this country is taking on her shoulders, as she has done on so many occasions in the history of our continent, that responsibility to take on the elites of Brussels and to show a path and framework for other countries to follow. And we will do this. Together we have to do this. Otherwise, what hope is there for other countries, smaller countries like Poland, who also eventually, further down the line, want to be able to regain their sovereignty? The most important thing, of course, as I'm sure Nigel will agree with me, is for those who are not yet in the Eurozone to avoid it. Because I tell you this, if we had ditched our currency in 2001 and 2002, I rather suspect the referendum decision may have gone the other way. That critical 2 or 3% may have thought that it would have been too difficult, too complicated a task to pull out of the European Union. So keeping your currency is absolutely vital, and this is the message that we will be taking to countries like Poland and others. There is only one country with a permanent opt-out from the Eurozone, Denmark, and if they successfully bludgeon these other countries to abandon their currency, they'll ring Copenhagen and they'll say, you know, that opt-out you thought you had, well, think again. This is rapidly becoming a supranationalist state with one currency, one foreign policy, one parliament, and one president. I can't think of anything more dangerous if you tried, and this is why it's so important to fight against that.
Well, Nigel, I know you'll be away. I want to thank you very much for coming to speak to the Bow Group. We said in 2015 that voters may want to consider voting UKIP in seats where Conservatives can't win. We got a huge amount of criticism for that. The calculation I made is that a lot of these people, the establishment in power at the moment, care about their own position and their views more than they care about the country. And I think that is what we are unfortunately seeing playing out with both Brexit negotiations and Trump. They hate you and Trump more than they love Britain. And I hope there is a way that we can put the true believers first in terms of Brexit and Trump. But I know your voice will be heard, whether in an official capacity or not. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're now going to hear, you have heard, all of you I'm sure, about the Trump Arms. The story of the Trump Arms is, there's a pub called the Jameson in Kensington. Irish guy runs it. Saw all of the coverage about the thousands of people that were going to be turning out into the streets and protesting Donald Trump, and felt that's not how his customers felt, that's not how the locality felt to him, that's not how average British people felt to him. And so he decided, in honour of Trump's visit, in London, bear in mind, to rename his pub the Trump Arms. And we have Patrick Sullivan here from Parliament Street, who's been heavily involved in that campaign. I congratulate him for doing the job that the British government should have been doing in rolling out the red carpet for Trump. And now we're going to hear about what he did and why he thinks it's important. Patrick.
Thank you very much. Well, I've got 2 points. Firstly is that the Westminster, I'd like to address this to the American heartland, the Westminster Village is as representative of the British people as Greenwich Village is of the American people. And the other point is that Donald Trump is offering us a lifeline to save Brexit, but for some reason the government is refusing to phone a friend. In terms of the Westminster Village not representing the British people, we know that in the bars and pubs of Westminster, the idea of Brexit seemed an impossibility. The political class didn't know what the British people thought. And because the press is biased, and they only, partially because we haven't done a good enough job of presenting our own side, but people don't hear the voice of the silent majority. And Donald Trump did. He had his finger on the pulse of the British people. He knew better than any of those people in the bars of Westminster that the British people wanted Brexit. So that's the first thing. So the idea that Donald Trump doesn't know what the British people think, I think is complete nonsense. The second thing is the British people appreciate Donald Trump. When I went to the Jameson, which is in Kensington, and I was with a friend of mine, and we were just talking. I heard Damien talk about Trump, so I went up to him and started talking. And he said, "Oh, I love President Trump." He said, "I love Brexit." And then pointed to another guy at the bar, said, "He loves President Trump too." I said, "Yeah, I do." Everybody in that pub pretty much supported Trump and supported Brexit. And actually, there's a lot of London that supports Trump and supports Brexit. But you just don't hear their voices because they're not one of the 400 people in this little village. So what Damien did, which I thought was absolutely brilliant, an idea sort of concocted over a couple of, maybe more, pints of stout, was let's rename the pub the Trump Arms so that we can show, so we have a visual, so that we can tell, because I know so many Americans feel uncomfortable right now being here thinking that we don't like them. We need to show them, we need to be big and bold like this president. And you know, if the left want to have protest, well, I'll tell you what, I can't be bothered doing that. We're throwing a party. It's far better use of time. And actually, to be honest, most people are busy working, putting food on the table, and have much better things to do than protest. These protesters account for a small minority of people who just have way too much time on their hands. So just because they're loud doesn't mean they represent the majority. The silent majority of people are hard-working Britons who voted for Brexit and support this president. And in terms of President Trump offering us a lifeline, and this deal that he's offering us, free trade, total free trade, when the EU has got a gun to our head saying that if we don't do what they say, they will wreck our economy, they will do this, they will do that. Well, I can't believe it, beggars belief that the British government, when it's being offered advice from the guy who wrote the art of the deal, isn't taking it. I would love a British Prime Minister to go and negotiate with these bureaucrats saying, well, you know what, you might think you know how to negotiate.
Patrick, would you mind if I interrupt you for a second? Because I know this issue is dear to your heart.
Yeah.
We've just had the news through that Trump has stayed an extra hour in NATO because he's got all NATO nations to agree to 2% of GDP spending.
Wow, fantastic.
So, 33 billion
Additional investment.
That's our man.
Well, so to wrap up, if you've got that guy in your corner, we're going to have a big, bold, beautiful Brexit, and he's going to save it. Thank you, President Trump. The British people say thank you, and the silent majority is standing with you.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you. In the next life, I hope. I don't think this government will be interested. Daniel, talking of this government, I mean, my personal view is that Theresa May should now be. I'm not someone that believes there should be an instant leadership election and that the government should be ousted. My view is that Theresa May should now be given time to reflect upon the response to her Chequers agreement. And to be fair to her, she has generally, perhaps because of her weak political position, but has generally shown herself to be quite consultative in her policy process. The Chequers thing came, I think, as a blindside to a lot of MPs. What's your position on the Chequers here?
Well, I think that she is in it's a difficult position to be in because of the arithmetic, and we should be coming together as a House of Commons, as a Parliament, to negotiate the strongest possible deal with the European Union. But unfortunately, some of the other political parties either haven't come to terms with Brexit, like the SNP, who doggedly and consistently on a daily basis are endeavouring to do everything possible to prevent Brexit from happening, or like the Labour Party, who have very mixed messages and aren't settled on a particular perspective, who are also playing party politics. I understand it's the role of opposition parties to try to cause problems for a government, but what we have seen to date is an attempt, in my view, to thwart Brexit and to thwart the sort of Brexit that over 17 million people voted for. So she is in a very difficult position, basically because of the very small majority that we have in the House of Commons. And as you know, there are certain Conservative colleagues, a small handful of Conservative colleagues, who also have been, who are very opposed to the sort of Brexit that I and others want. On the one hand, you would say to yourself that if we're making this monumental decision, we want to have the widest possible views and debates from different people with different perspectives coming forward. But at some stage, we've got to coalesce around a particular deal before time passes us by. What I would say, though, is that this is a battle of wills. No country has successfully taken on the elites in Brussels and lived to tell the tale. Certainly not in my lifetime, and I'm 46. Every time a country has had the temerity to challenge the elites of Brussels, they have been told to think again, whether it was the referendum in Denmark, or France, or Ireland, or Holland. This is the first time in the history of the European Union where a country has said no and has passed into legislation an act of Parliament formally triggering the process of pulling out of the European Union. So of course it's a massive battle of wills. Either we cave in and comply with the European Union in all its attributes that they want in this new relationship, or we push back. And I'm going to be reading the white paper later today, which is being published today, to get more understanding of it. And I will try to support the Prime Minister as best as I can. But I make no bones and no apologies for working with Jacob Rees-Mogg in the European Research Group, amongst many other British members of Parliament on the Conservative benches, because we believe that the voices of millions of people need to be heard in this Parliament, those people who voted 2 years ago to regain complete sovereignty for our nation, which means complete control of our borders, our Supreme Court being supreme within the jurisdiction of the United Kingdom, and ensuring that free movement is stopped, and all the other things which are vestiges of being a sovereign nation state. And we must not fall into the trap of becoming a vassal state of the European Union, whereby we have left but continue to have to adhere to all of their dictates and policies. So the jury is out at the moment until we get more substantive information about the white paper.
Daniel, thank you. We've just been joined by my old friend Raheem Kassam. Raheem, when you and I met, you were working at Game. Are you still doing that, or have you moved on to?
I don't sell computer games anymore.
Right.
Even though sometimes I wish I did.
Yeah. So we've just had
Do you play a lot of computer games?
So do I. With you a lot of time. But we've just had a debate with Nigel and Daniel about the way the UK government has approached the Trump visit and the way it is approaching the Brexit deal. Trump himself, I think, has tweeted today to say that he doesn't feel British people are getting what they voted for in Brexit. You sit between the Atlantic. You see the administration over there. You see how they view us. I think there's a common misconception in Westminster that MPs can go around bad-mouthing Donald Trump and then flip when Donald Trump's in town, or flip when they go over to Washington, and it will all be smiles and sunshine for a trade deal. Nigel was here earlier criticising the way that they have given him the cold shoulder and his willingness to help out in any way he can. From the US administration side, who do you think the world can and should put forward to get the kind of trade deal that Trump is offering?
Well, firstly, we need to be assured, and by the way, thank you all for having me, sorry I'm late. I was watching when President Trump was just giving this press conference in Brussels, where he said that it doesn't look like the British people are getting what they voted for. And somebody shouted out, "Hard Brexit," and he said, "What's that? Heartbreaking?" And no, he did. It literally just happened. And you know what? It is heartbreaking. It's not just heartbreaking if you're a Brexiteer, I don't think. It's heartbreaking if you believe that we have a functioning democracy. If you believe that once the majority of people vote something, the largest democratic exercise we've ever seen in this country, that should be seen through. And these are, as Ben explained, I spend most of my time now on Capitol Hill, and the question I get asked most is, please sir, move out of the way. And the second question I get asked most is, what's going on with Brexit? How can we help? And I'm talking about congressmen, senators, diplomats, right-leaning journalists. All they want to know is how they can help. And we had the promise of a big trade deal. You remember, even during the Republican primary campaign, we had the people standing up there, I think Ted Cruz and others saying, Britain would not go to the back of the queue, as Barack Obama said. And that started off a whole conversation that has led to Ambassador Woody Johnson kindly saying the same thing, President Trump saying the same thing. And then you have, and look, it wasn't Whitehall. It was number 10 who decided that the president should not meet with Nigel Farage when he's in town. Well, okay, fine. If this Prime Minister, and she has a lot of reasons to be glass-jawed, but if this Prime Minister is so glass-jawed that she believes that somehow this would massively undercut her plan. I mean, don't forget, these are basically two old mates now, right? Who might want to have a handshake or, you know, a cup of coffee together. And if she genuinely thinks that, to answer your question, that he's not the right person, the question needs to be asked of her, who is the right person. And I don't believe that she could point to anyone in her current, cabinet, that could actually get along with President Trump. Now, he said a couple of days ago, you know, when I go over there, I'm going to talk to Boris. I'm going to see Boris. I'm going to hear what Boris has to say. Now, I haven't traditionally been the biggest Boris fan, but to answer your question, I think that might be the next step. And Daniel, I hope you might help us in this regard. We have to get David Davis and Boris Johnson on the same page. Well, first we have to get them in the same room and talking to each other and presenting a united front. So I hope that somehow answers the question.
Yeah, I mean, Daniel, do you see that unity on those that are disgruntled with the Chequers deal, or do you think it's more of a splintered thing?
Well, just before I answer that, I mean, I'm old enough to remember, just as a quick point about President Trump, I'm old enough to remember the 1980 presidential election where we had President Reagan versus President Carter. And of course, at that time, many of the liberal elite, both on the American side of the Atlantic, but also in this country, were siren voices about this American Hollywood actor, this B-rate movie actor who was trigger happy, this lunatic who was going to cause Armageddon and World War III in the nuclear age. He ended up being one of the greatest American presidents in the history of that nation. And it was his vision and courage and fortitude that managed to take on the communism and the Soviet Union, which has led, and his work with Margaret Thatcher, which of course led those two figures and their common goals led to the collapse of the Soviet Union and the freedom of half of Europe. My country of origin, Poland, which had been subjugated behind the Iron Curtain for nearly 50 years, I try to explain to some young people today what it was like living under communism. I find it fascinating talking to them because, of course, you can read about Animal Farm and all the books, but I'm actually somebody who lived in a communist system. And I can tell you it was not a pleasant experience. And it was the wisdom and vision of people like Reagan that managed to save hundreds of millions of people on the continent of Europe, trapped in the Stalinist system. But to answer your question specifically, look, it's not a question about splintering, it's just a question of showing respect to the British people. We don't know what was in the minds of the 17.4 million people who voted for Brexit. 17.4 million people will all have gone to the polling stations and for a myriad of reasons, some in conjunction with others, but some very personal and individual, will have decided at the end of the day to put a cross in the Brexit box. We can't possibly know the myriad of issues, but what we have to do is we have to publicise and accentuate what we believe a large proportion of them voted for, which is to regain sovereignty of this nation and to ensure that, as I've said before, that we can demonstrate that we have become a sovereign nation state, which means that our Supreme Court is supreme within the United Kingdom, that we control our borders, we manage immigration, and that Parliament here, this building here, this very building, is responsible for the laws that are made. And we also have to show greater level of transparency and accountability. I say to my constituents, I'll give you £100 at public meetings. I put £100 on the table, and I'll say, I'll give you £100 now if you can name me any of the members of the European Parliament that represent you. Haven't lost a penny to date in 13 years, because nobody knows who their members of the European Parliament are. Because they represent an area called the West Midlands of 5 million people, which is larger than certain European countries. And none of them live in my county of Shropshire, none of them have offices there, none of them come to meet with the constituents. And by the way, they're working in another country. I believe in bringing politicians closer to the people that they represent and making those individuals directly accountable to the people for the decisions that they are taking on a daily basis and the votes that they are taking on the daily basis. And this is what we are trying to stand up for in this huge debate as to what sort of Brexit we will finally pass later on this year.